Welcome to Let's Talk Security, where we spotlight cybersecurity companies and give an inside look at the people and technology behind the latest advancements in the industry. We discuss a wide range of topics with subject matter experts about today's cybersecurity challenges and how their solutions are helping organizations like yours maintain a continuous security posture. Please welcome the host of Let's Talk Security, Jeff Wolach.
Today on Let's Talk Security, I will be speaking with the company CRITICALSTART. I'm here with Randy Watkins, Chief Technology Officer. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Randy, I put together a few questions for our chat today, so why don't we just jump right in?
Sure.
Tell us about CRITICALSTART, its history, and your role as CTO.
Yeah, so CRITICALSTART was founded back in 2012 by our CEO, Rob Davis. And Rob was the EVP of security at RSA. For 14 years, he was at RSA in various positions. And his last position, he was involved with the big breach that they had. And he went on what he calls the worldwide apology tour and talked to a lot of the clients about, hey, this is what happened. This is what was, compromised. And, there's other ways to protect yourself. And hopefully you have these different controls in place. And what he saw was there was a big disconnect between what customers thought they had security posture wise and what they had actually operationalized inside their environment, right? And the general trend was there were a lot of resellers out there that were riding the wave of security sales, and they were pushing boxes that didn't really result in increased security posture for the customer. So he decided to leave and start CRITICALSTART, with the whole goal being to improve customer security posture using technology as efficiently as possible. Because security is not one thing. It's not just tools. It's people, product, and policy procedure. So we start off as a VAR, a value-added reseller, partnering up with best-of-breed technologies, much like yourself, and kind of going out and recommending those to customers, but more performing the services to get them properly operationalized. And then it slowly evolved over time, and then we kind of made a pivot into the managed detection and response space. Now, as CTO, I've been there since the beginning. So I came on board March of 2012, really when we started to ramp everything up. Previously, I was at a large insurance company as an architect there. And starting off at CRITICALSTART, I did kind of pre-sales. I did some post-sales implementation. Then I kind of ran the pre-sales side. And then I really moved into a technology evaluation position where I was looking at the bleeding edge technologies. I was reevaluating our current partnerships. I was finding which security products really provided value back to the customers. And then I would kind of educate downward into the field and make sure that our recommendations were holding true. Then as we started to really make the pivot towards managed detection and response, I moved over to that side and started the product management group. So really taking in that list of feature requests and prioritizing them, getting resources assigned to them, and responsible for cranking out the roadmap. Turned that over since it was a fully built organization and I don't like staying inside. Turned that over to our new VP of product, John, and really got back into the field working with channel partners, working with manufacturers, talking to customers, and really engaging at a field level, which is what I enjoy doing. So I've had my hand in pretty much everything and have got to be with the company as it's grown, which has afforded me a lot of really unique and fun, interesting opportunities.
No, that is absolutely great. I mean, being there from the start is really amazing. And then the fact that when we spoke previously, you had mentioned that at CRITICALSTART, you guys have a 99% analyst retention rate. I mean, that in itself says a lot about the company culture. Do you want to share with us a little bit about the CRITICALSTART culture and why it's important to have such a retention rate like you do with your analysts?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, culture is first and foremost. So we have 3 core tenets inside of the company that is a litmus test for all things that we do. The first is do what's right for the customer. Obviously, if you don't have customers, your company doesn't matter. The second is do what's right for employees. If you don't have good employees, you're not going to get the customers and then your company dissolves. And then the third thing is don't do things that suck. So in everything we develop and everything we do and all the recommendations we make and any report that we put out and any, instant response engagement, it's always one of those, or the combination of those three questions that drive us to make a decision. Is this the best thing for the customer? Is this the best thing for Critical Start? And does this suck? And if the answers come out appropriately, then we make the decision and move on. We've adopted those as the three core tenets, but we've also adopted a lot of practices that you see at like Amazon, where it's a fail fast mentality. Failure is a team sport. We drag the whole company down with the decision if we need to, right? And the idea is to get people involved early enough to where they can change or impact the outcome. So that's kind of the company culture. When you look at our analyst retention rate, there's more than just company culture that goes into that. There's definitely some bits of platform that go into it, because the number one reason for analyst burnout is seeing the same alert over and over and over and over again, not having any recourse. And then there's also kind of the fun aspect of it, right? We treat our analysts like kings of the kingdom, because they mostly are. I mean, without our analysts, we really don't have a service. So they are the rulers of the universe. And we have a lot of fun. Back, kind of pre-COVID days, we'd have a lot of Nerf fights. Nerf fights were from 4 to 4:04 every day. There's a ping pong table. We regularly bring in pizza and donuts and breakfast tacos, and it's really a family, kind of a family mentality around there. There's no hesitancy to help somebody else out or to ask for assistance, and it creates a really solid kind of culture that people enjoy being in and people thrive in, which also leads us to the training aspect. Right, there's an old adage of, would you rather train an employee and risk them leaving, or not train an employee and risk them staying? So in today's cybersecurity world, attracting and retaining talent is in and of itself intellectual property for most organizations. I mean, it's so difficult to find the people, even if you have unlimited resources in terms of money. It's so difficult to just find the people. Once you get them, you have to keep them engaged, keep them challenged, and really keep them growing. So what we found works extremely well. Nerds want to be nerds. We want to learn. We want to do things. So we constantly are investing in training up our talent. We can bring somebody in that does not have a history in cybersecurity, put them through our essentially Analyst 101 course, which includes everything from scoping breaches to how to work with our integration partners, to how to work within our own platform, and how to communicate with customers. We can provide them continuous education, and they can pursue cloud certificates or their OSCP or their CISP, whatever they want. And then they can go through a certain career path to get to a tier 2 analyst, where they go through x86 and 64-bit training, so they know how to reverse malware. Once they get to a tier 2, they can move up into a tier 3. They can go out into the field as a pre-sales engineer. They can go into our incident response team, our pen test team. So we don't just lock them into a single position. We don't just say, here's your desk, sit here, never go anywhere else. We encourage them to move up, and if they want to, move out of the SOC or move into a leadership position. And we've never hired anybody above a tier 1 analyst in our SOC. So we hire everybody in at tier 1, and everybody puts in the time and the effort to move up and out if they want to. And all of that together is really what makes Critical Start so successful, is because we do put in the time, the energy, we do see a return. We do see it as a necessity for our leaders to raise leaders. We do what's right for the employees, and that's really something that's been in existence since the company's inception 8.5, almost 9 years ago.
No, that's absolutely very important. As you said, it's really the overall big picture, right? It's the whole package. So,
yeah, I mean, how many customers do you go into where they have 99% employee retention over 5 years?
Not many.
Yeah,
not many. Absolutely. And it's, it is that whole big package, the overall training, the lateral movement, being able to excel, and the culture itself, the family culture that you guys, have, is really very impressive. So kudos to you guys. For sure.
Yeah, we get asked quite a bit, where do we pull people from? Where do you get your talent? And a lot of folks would think that we're going out and finding these top end analysts that are they've been in the industry for 20 years. And we certainly have a lot of, very tenured expertise. But we can actually, now that we've developed the training, it's an in-house developed training. It's repeatable. We can deliver it over and over again. We know exactly how long it takes, who's supposed to train it, what the expected outcome is. We can grab, young, fresh, hungry talent directly out of college and immediately give them a jump into cybersecurity. Although most of our analysts nowadays are being recruited based on referrals from other analysts. They love the company so much that they want their friends to work there as well. So
Very cool.
we're pulling our talent from everything from UTD, University of Texas Dallas, Texas A&M, Tulsa University. We have some great feeder schools, SMU. We have some great feeder schools around here, but we're also getting them. I mean, we have some analysts and engineers that have culinary degrees. They have criminal justice degrees. They have, all kind of walks of life seem to emerge and find cybersecurity fascinating. It's a great industry. And if you can get in with the right company, then it's a very lucrative and enjoyable career path.
That's awesome. That really is. And from your history, you guys have been in the information security space for a while now. You've, like you say, you offer, you were once a reseller, but you also offer a lot of consulting services, such as the incident response, risk and compliance, penetration testing, forensics, managed services. But your most recent one, that was one of the reasons why we became a partner at Critical Start, is the managed detection and response, or MDR service. Tell us a little bit about that new service and why MDR is getting a lot of attention these days.
Yeah, that's a big question. So, the reseller side was definitely a great break in, and it was a good way for us to enable our services arms. So doing the GRC services, the penetration testing, the incident response, and those services definitely still play a solid role inside of Critical Start. We started the MDR most recently, even though it was 5 years ago. It does not seem like 5 years. And the reason we started that is, when we looked at the space 5 years ago, we looked at what attackers were doing, right? We looked at the attacker landscape, and what we saw was huge growth in the dark web for selling exploits that had been immediately weaponized after the exploit was discovered. So it was a very low time from discovery to weaponization. And those were being sold on the dark web. At the same time, we saw the massive proliferation of cryptocurrency, which allowed them to monetize not just the exploits themselves, but also the attack. So if we launch ransomware, now we can, somewhat anonymously collect the ransom. So everything was kind of lining up for attacks to become commoditized, cheaper, easier, faster. Well, we looked at the manufacturer response to that. What are all the cybersecurity manufacturers? What are the Palo Altos and the Cylance and the Carbon Blacks and the Microsofts and the CrowdStrikes and the SentinelOnes of the world? What are they doing as a response to this? And what we saw was they were being trained by service providers, by resellers, by customers, that they could never miss a detection, right? No false negatives. You have to detect literally everything. And on the flip side of the coin, there's grumblings, but there was never any real brand damage to over detection, right? So the manufacturers see it as, okay, we need to detect everything, and then they interpret it programmatically as, okay, we'll detect everything. Like, whoa, those are two different things, right? So what we ended up with as a security community was so much stuff being generated that we actually coined a term for the annoyance behind it, which was alert fatigue, right? That actually became a real term. It's industry recognized, alert fatigue. It is. And it's like, okay, so to me and to us, the problem was not detection, right? And you see a lot of folks going out there trying to solve the detection problem, trying to bubble up a bad, trying to, ingest telemetry and do it again. And, there's definitely some credit to that. I mean, everybody's got a good idea every once in a while, and you do see some pretty cool emerging technologies that are working off the raw telemetry that's collected by security manufacturers already. But we didn't feel the need to solve that problem. The problem that we set out to solve was, how do we deal with false positives at scale? And when you look at that problem, there's different approaches to take that on, and we looked at what larger, more mature SOCs were doing, and we also looked at what other service providers were doing. We looked at what MSSPs at the time. There was no such thing as MDR, so we looked at what MSPs and what would evolve into MDRs were doing at the time, and what we saw was they were inherently accepting risk on the customer's behalf to gain efficiency in lieu of effectiveness. So they were essentially bypassing detections that would normally happen just so they could scale out their workforce. And these MSPs that were coming out, they were, maybe they were in security, maybe they were in infrastructure, maybe they were in networking, but a lot of the CISOs at the time were not, we're not career-long security experts, right? Maybe they were in infrastructure, they were in networking, they were in systems engineering, and they got migrated into CISO. But now what we have is we have CISOs that have been in security for 15, 20, 25 years, and they have been doing data protection that long. And we didn't feel that any of the options on the market at the time were what security experts would want to use. We felt that there was such a knowledge and an understanding of risk acceptance and how to deal with it, which that's all security is the ability and the art form of accepting, transferring, and mitigating risk. There was so much knowledge of that when you paired that up with the offerings that they had, those two things just didn't jive. There was no solution for security experts that really understood security. So the whole reason we started that MDR service was to build something that security experts themselves would want to use, and that message and that mindset that we've had and the approach that we've taken has really started to resonate with folks who are coming back around and saying, "Oh, this actually is different." And yeah, if I had all the unlimited resources to build a massive SOC, this is exactly how I would do it. And that's what's starting to latch on.
So you talk about risk assessment, acceptance, I should say, and you're right. I mean, risk acceptance can take down a company, actually. And then you and I were speaking previously, and you said that Critical Start doesn't accept risk. Talk with me a little bit about that. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, when we looked at how the false positive situation was being handled by not just other service providers, but also in-house SOCs, what we saw is it really boiled down to one of two methodologies. The first methodology we've named input-oriented. And this is where you're purposefully misconfiguring the product, maybe not in a malicious way, but out of necessity. You're misconfiguring the product as a way to rid yourself of some of the false positives, right? So you're turning off the speeds and feeds. You're turning off the detection logic. You're tuning the product by disabling its ability to detect an attack. And what that really is, if you kind of put it into risk terms, is the acceptance of unquantified risk. We always talk about in security how you don't know what you don't know, right? And when you start turning off that detection logic, you don't know even more. But now you can kind of turn the blind eye to it. You can declare that ignorance is bliss, and I had no idea that this was even detected. Well, maybe you would have if you if you hadn't shut off the rule, or you hadn't tuned the policy in such a way. I'm sure you've seen your fair share of customers who get hit by a piece of ransomware or malware or something like that. And you go in and you look at it, you say, well, hold on, you have such and such on the endpoint, you have such and such on the network. This should have been prevented. And then you look at the configuration and you go, oh, well, you realize you're in alert only, or you're setting it to very high fidelity, right? This is actually not going to detect or prevent anything. So we see that as the first line of false positive reduction. Then you see something that's much more common and well known throughout the industry, and that's the priority model. Right, so all of these security manufacturers spit out alerts with priority, and they try their best to appropriately prioritize, but they have limited context of what's normal for that business, what's normal inside the environment, how does that business actually operate, what applications do they use regularly. So that generates some false positives and maybe some prioritization that isn't entirely accurate. So what most SOCs resort to is reducing or only looking at those highest criticality alerts. They're looking at the criticals, they're looking at the highs, but very rarely do we get to the mediums and lows just based on the sheer quantity. The problem with that is it's not unquantified risk, but you're still accepting quantified risk, right? You're looking at the alerts and you're saying, hey, I only have time to go through these top 50, and that's something that's very difficult to solve for. So when we looked at that, it was frustrating, and it was infuriating, because it's one thing for the business to accept risk, right? I mean, we as security professionals have to realize that if the CISO or the CIO or the CEO comes in tomorrow and says, hey, listen, we accept all risk, right? That's a business decision and we're out of a job. No business is really going to make that decision, but it's something that could happen. It's a different thing entirely when you transfer that risk to a third party with the thought that they're going to mitigate it, but they really accept it on your behalf. And they never come back around and they never phrase it like that. They never put that on the risk register and say, hey, we're going to go ahead and sign our name next to accepting the risk that no medium and low alert is valid. So we see that as inherent risk acceptance by third parties, by service providers. So what we do that's different is through our platform, we call it the Zero Trust Analytics Platform, or ZTAP. Through our platform, we are able to look at and investigate and resolve every single alert that gets generated by these security products. We ingest the alerts, we run them against what we've coined as our trusted behavior registry. And through that, we're able to resolve every single alert that comes through. And if we haven't seen an exact alert before, then it's eyes on glass, right? It's our SOC, it's our analysts that go through and do full triage and will respond and contain the threat if it's deemed a true positive. So through that methodology of accepting or of looking at every single alert, we're not inherently accepting risk on the customer's behalf. We're offering them exactly what they would want if it was up to them. They would say, sure, I would love to have every alert resolved. Well, now they can get that. And we're not accepting risk for them, which to us, plays into rules number 1 and 3 of the company. It's the right thing for the customer and it doesn't suck.
Yeah, and that's important because, think about it. The bad guys are always looking for a way to kind of get through. And if they figure out, hey, you're only looking at the top, important alerts, I'm going to do low and slow, and I'll just make it so that it's really looks nominal to your organization, but I'm getting in and I'm getting your data. So yeah, that's it is an important, thing, that don't accept all the risk at all.
Yeah, the live off the land attacks have really made EDR extremely important, right? I mean, those live off the land attacks, we have a pen test team internally, Team Aries, and they release 0 days regularly, right? This is probably one of the best pen test teams in the world. They release, they can find 20 or 30 0 days on a single pen test, depending on the applications that are used. If they're setting off critical and high alerts, they're doing it on purpose, right? They want you to know they're there, or they're setting off a red herring. So like, don't look over here, it's just misdirection. They live off the land. They're using applications that are native on the machine. And if you're not looking at all of those low level alerts, those low fidelity alerts that are hidden in the tens of thousands of other alerts you have, I guarantee you're going to miss them. They have a pretty phenomenal track record of getting what they want out of organizations undetected until they finally, start turning up the noise and seeing where that threshold is. But the ability to look at all those alerts is definitely imperative to detecting and responding to some of the more advanced and even some of the more intermediate attackers that are in the threat landscape today.
No, you're right. One of the things that actually is very scary is DNS, right? Tunneling through DNS. Nobody really monitors DNS. DNS is something that you accept. You say, I can't, function without DNS. Mm-hmm. And the attackers figured out, hey, there's a way I can make my request look very legitimate and nobody's monitoring that and steal your data. So yeah, you got to definitely look at those low fidelity alerts as well.
Yeah, Team Aries actually released it's open source. So if anybody wants to go download it, they can check out the Team Aries GitHub. They released a open source command and control framework, like an actual application you can download. You can build your exploits into it. You can send them out and have it beacon back. And DNS is one of those tunneling mechanisms that they use that goes widely undetected, or at least unencumbered. So yeah, there's just so many threats, so many vectors to get through that if you think you're constantly looking for the known bad, you're not looking enough, right? Known bad is the new good. It's wild what we're expected to deal with. And the old security adage, the attacker only has to be right once. We have to be right every single time. That's 100% correct, right? And a lot of people try to spin it with the Lockheed Martin kill chain. We only have to act in one part of the kill chain. The attacker has to be successful in all of them. Yeah, but the attacker can launch 50 attacks at the same time, and you're not going to know which one to interrupt in the kill chain. So we try to stack our controls, which generates more alerts, which means that we have to have more people, which we never get. And we spend all of our time implementing as opposed to looking at the alerts coming out of the solutions. And it never gets operationalized. And our red team subsequently, or other attackers, they just walk right through the front door because you're not looking at all the alerts coming through the SOC. So it's definitely a big problem that we set out to solve. So far, we've been successful at doing it. But it's a daunting task. And if you're a CISO in today's security industry, or if you're a director or manager, I mean, entry-level analyst, my heart goes out to you, because I know how difficult it is to try to launch an effective campaign against attackers.
No, you make a great case. I mean, any organization that wants to have that level of granularity and be able to detect all the high fidelity, low fidelity. I mean, it takes a team, and it takes education. And, that takes me to my next question. I mean, your MDR service, what size organizations are good candidates for that?
So we originally built the MDR thinking that we were going to serve customers between 300 endpoints and 1,000 endpoints. We figured, well, not only do they not have the headcount or the expertise, but they also don't have the kind of the connections or the attention of the security manufacturers that they need to buy products from, right? They can't go out and buy a lot of these enterprise solutions. And of course, the market has adjusted. Now there's inside sales teams that facilitate the SMB space. But at the time, you couldn't get the same protections if you only had a couple hundred users as somebody who has, 10, 15,000 users. So that's the market that we targeted. What we found was very quickly that the actual market that really needs MDRs is upstream. So we have everything from, 200 or 300 user companies that, would like enterprise level security capabilities, all the way up to 80,000 user school systems and 110,000 user manufacturing organizations. We have customers that are very, very large that range in maturity levels. And that's the real important measurement, is how mature is your security practice at the organization. And some of these smaller organizations that are 600 users, they have a security team of 10, 12 folks that are doing everything from identity and access management, vulnerability management, patch management, to endpoint detection and response, and doing alert analysis. And then we have 50,000 user healthcare organizations that have 2 people inside of security. And we've found that MDR really does fit in any of those areas. It's pretty obvious on the lower end of the maturity spectrum where MDR is a necessity. But on the higher end, even if you have 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 analysts, are those analysts able to get to every single alert, right? And are you shortchanging your security program in other areas of the organization to allow your analysts to do that tier 1 and 2? And when we look at what can be effectively outsourced to a third party like an MDR, tier 1 and 2 alert triage and response is pretty easy to send out, right? Like I can do a lot of triage without having inherent knowledge of an organization's environment. 90% of the alerts that we look at are common across applications between our customers, because they're all Adobe and Chrome and Firefox and Office, and the applications that are most commonly used make the most alerts. So tier 1 and 2 triage can really be handed off pretty effectively. And what we've seen is some of these larger organizations with the larger security headcounts, they're repurposing those analysts, they're elevating those analysts, they're turning those analysts that they used to have doing tier 1 and 2 into tier 3, into incident responders, into pen testers, into application security testers, into identity and access management directors, vulnerability management. There's so many other facets of security that we oftentimes neglect for the kind of the more sexy side of security, which is that real, like, big screen with all the alerts and the telemetry going up and down, and we have dots flying from left to right. We ignore a lot of the other foundational security practices so we can get that part right. So our larger clients, what we're doing is we're augmenting that security team. We're taking over that tier 1 and 2, and often more effectively, more efficiently, and at a better cost than what they would do it for themselves. And then they take those higher priced, more valuable, difficult to find, difficult to retain resources, and they put them on a job that resource is actually going to enjoy, as opposed to just scrolling through the endless queue of alerts. So, I mean, in terms of size, we've not found a very common size. I think our average customer size is somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,000 to 10,000 users, but they range up and down the spectrum. And we don't really have a specific industry that we fit in either. I mean, these issues in security are common across all of our verticals, from manufacturing to higher ed to government to research to retail, hospitalities. We kind of cover all the verticals, oil and gas, energy, pretty evenly. So I don't know that there's a good candidate. It's really, do you need help resolving those alerts? Do you need that 24/7 coverage? Would you like to not accept risk as an option? Anybody that's kind of shaking their head along with that, yeah, they're probably a good candidate, somebody that should reach out and get more information about the service we provide.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, my motto is there's no customers too small, right? I mean, think about it. A lot of people say, well, the company's only got 5 people. Well, that particular company that has 5 people, if basically something goes wrong, that means it's it's over, it's done. And, everybody's company is very important to them. Go ahead.
So to your point on the smaller companies, in today's world where funding is so easy to come across and technology is operating so fast, it gives credence to ideas to immediately spin them up. We have some really cool companies that are doing big things that are very, very small. And we have 100-person companies that are replicating DNA. I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. And there's a lot of implications behind that. And who else is interested in replicating DNA? Probably quite a few nation states, right? So they oftentimes, these smaller organizations that have the perception of little to no security, they oftentimes face the biggest threats because nation states look at it and say, I can probably get their intellectual property pretty quick, right? So I 100% agree with you. These smaller companies, not only is it their livelihood, it's their full company, but oftentimes they do have some true intellectual property that makes them a target of interest as opposed to a target of opportunity.
Yeah, no, it takes me back to when I was many years ago, working for Network General, selling the sniffer analyzers. There's a very well-known company in Atlanta, Georgia, the Weather Channel, right? They had about 5 computers, but you know what? All those 5 computers basically were very important. If one of those went down, the guy's just standing in front of a green screen with nothing to talk about. So again, it's very important. Mm-hmm. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been talking with other vendors and partners of ours, and some of them actually make endpoint protection solutions, and some make the network traffic analysis products. Why do you see MDR today focusing so much on the endpoint? And then what makes CriticalStart's MDR unique in that perspective?
So when you look at the endpoint and you look at the purpose of managed detection and response vendors, the R is the big piece, right? The response, the ability to do something about the alerts. There's a lot of customers that have had the legacy MSSP services where it was more of a somewhat managed detect some things and escalate service. It was almost like an MDE, managed detection and escalate. and they didn't really add a ton of value. And the reason they couldn't add a lot of value is because they didn't have visibility into what was actually happening. And if you think about most attacks, and I'll say most because there's certainly the outliers and there's campaigns that live in, network devices and things like that, or they try to do nothing but sniff traffic. If you look at most attacks, the endpoint is involved somewhere, right? It's going to be used as a pivot point. It's going to be used as a backdoor. It might be the initial breach. And if we can get endpoint data on what's executing, on the network connections coming off of it, who's logged in, was there any injection? We can detect a lot more than if we're just looking at the network data. And if I give somebody a firewall alert, and I hand that to an analyst and I say, hey, here's an outbound C2 communication, the immediate first question is, what process made that network connection? Who's logged into that machine that ran that process? How did that process land there in the first place, right? You want to dive back to RCA, the root cause analysis. And we can't do root cause analysis based solely on network. And there's definitely some viability to network, and there's definitely some importance into network traffic and NTA. Don't get me wrong. I did quite a bit of threat hunting on the legacy NetWitness platform back when it was just packet capture and reconstruction, back on version 9852. So there's definitely some value there. But if you can get that endpoint data as an analyst, you can very quickly determine what the root cause was. You can triage all the way back to a definitive answer of what happened on that machine. You get a very clear picture of, the user downloaded this ran out of their downloads folder. It made an outbound network connection. It downloaded this additional executable to a temp directory, which created these registry keys, and then created a process that continuously beacons out to this IP address, right? All of that can be gathered from the endpoint. And you can also see the user context that's associated with it. So did they end up running Mimikatz and they stole the user credential? And now they're logged into 60 different endpoints. All that stuff is extremely valuable. And then the ability to say, okay, now isolate that endpoint, right? We can do some of that with network technology. I mean, you can use dynamic lists. You can enter in a bunch of firewall rules. But with users becoming more and more remote, especially in today's day and age, it's very important to have some level of access to where the user is actually interacting on the keyboard, right? So if we can disable that account or contain that endpoint, it's extremely important. Now, what makes Critical Start's MDR unique in that regard? We do recognize the importance of outside sources. So we do have integrations, not just with endpoint, but also with SIM, also with OpenDNS, now Cisco Umbrella. We do have outside integrations that allow us to ingest that third party or outside telemetry that's not just EDR data. So we can really contextualize everything, maybe do some additional detections or insert some additional logic to pick up on things that EDR may not see, things like authentication logs, things like email, proxy, firewall. We can still pick up on that. And we've also built very deep API integrations into all of our products, right? So we can respond directly from our console, which is 100% transparent to the customer. They can access the exact same console that our analysts are in. So there's a few different unique differentiators, but overall, that's where we see the importance of EDR in the MDR space, is its advanced ability to do detections based on the visibility coming from the endpoint and then the capability to respond on the endpoint using that agent.
Now, how about XDR? I mean, that's kind of starting to percolate right now. What's your take on XDR, and where do you see the future of that?
Well, what's your take on XDR?
Well, basically, enhancing the data, like you were saying, with other information from firewalls, from your DNS providers, from other API sources. So I think you guys are already doing XDR.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we don't consider ourselves an XDR manufacturer, but we are definitely extending the reach of detection. I think XDR is a very promising future. If you look at SIM and what we created SIM to do, it started off initially as a way to centralize all the data we would need for incident triage and response. And then we expanded that to say, okay, well, if we see these patterns, we can be reasonably certain that this is bad. So let's include detection. Let's build in correlation rules. So the whole idea was to lower the dwell time of attackers, right? Faster investigation, faster detection. There wasn't really any response until, the last 5 years or so, when people started to introduce different playbooks that could do different things via API with their different integration partners. What increases that even more is when you're able to take the logic and the telemetry that SIM holds and include that definitive source of information, which is the endpoint. So what you see now is a lot of manufacturers starting to pivot and say, okay, I can get the endpoint data, right? I have an agent that's already sitting there. It's doing NGAV, next gen AV, and it's doing EDR. How can I bring in third-party data as well as network data to enrich what is being picked up on the endpoint and increase my ability to respond and detect in a single platform where the definitive data is the core of the platform itself, as opposed to trying to export all of the data and telemetry that comes off of endpoints into the SIM. You can keep that data where it's at, which is usually a much more rich and fertile ground for correlation and telemetry gathering. So I think XDR does present some advantages as it matures, but we're still waiting on that maturity, right? There's very few platforms that are properly correlating between network and endpoint and third party data, and how do you get that third party data in? So there's definitely a little bit of stirring and disruption that's going on in the space, and it'll ultimately be to the manufacturers of these XDR platforms to mature them to a point where they present a viable, centralized alternative to something like a SIM with an EDR, with an NDR, with a NTA. We can look in one place and see all that telemetry being brought in to a single point of response, which I think was the initial intent of SIM, but it didn't necessarily come to fruition due to cost, things like that.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many people have bought SIM and probably still haven't deployed it, right? It's just interesting factor there. Now, what are you guys seeing? I mean, obviously we're in a pandemic situation. People have, pivoted from on-prem to, remote work from home. What are you guys seeing as far as that since March?
That's the big question, right? I mean, that's the unfortunate situation that we have to deal with. Of course, everybody's remote, right? And my wife, she's not due back in the office until July of next year. I've heard a lot of other organizations are closed down till at least the beginning of the year, and some of them spanning much further past July next year. And of course, all this is dependent on the therapeutics and vaccines and what the science says when we get to that point. But remote workers are what we have to deal with. And in terms of how that's impacting security and how is it not, Gartner released their triad of what's important. And they said, endpoint, network, and logs. And I still think all three of those are pretty valid and important, especially if you're backhauling the traffic, which is another thing that we've had to deal with. But now you're looking at endpoint, obviously, but we're also looking at SaaS, because most applications are moving up to the cloud. And if you're not on-prem and you're not backhauling that traffic, then the network isn't going to pick up that SaaS stuff necessarily. And identity, right? You have to have a login to everything you use. So how can we gather telemetry, make correlation inferences on that, and then make responses based on that? So I think the dynamic overall, the what's important to security is starting to shift to encompass more of that remote worker. Some of the immediate things we had to deal with was, well, how do we backhaul traffic? Do we backhaul traffic? Do we have the firewalls for it? Do we use cloud-based firewalls to haul all the traffic up to the cloud and then send it out to the internet? Do we dual tunnel? Do we have enough laptops to send our users home? We had a ton of customers that said, hey, we're going to be bringing on another 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 assets because we just had to go out and buy laptops for our entire workforce and send them home, right? That's a huge attack surface. And all of those laptops connect to home Wi-Fi. Guess how many of those home Wi-Fis have a enterprise-grade firewall with a dynamic sandbox for all their attachments and URL filtering? Exactly zero, right? So you have all these users taking laptops to their unsecure home network and then hopefully connecting back via VPN, but maybe not. And then they're going straight out to the internet. And for whatever reason, users feel like, because they're home, they can, I mean, they're home, right? I'm comfortable. I can cruise on this laptop just like I cruise on any other laptop. So we saw a huge flood of alerts coming in, and that's on our side where we're looking at 1 million endpoints that we have under management. That's on our side, looking at all those alerts. I mean, the customers that don't have an MDR, that aren't our customer, they got the same bulk of alerts, and I don't know how they dealt with it, if they dealt with it. So, what have we seen since March? We've seen everything. I don't know what we haven't seen since March.
Yeah, it's amazing. But, my home is protected, and I'm sure yours is too, but you're absolutely right. I mean, not everybody has the access to the type of security solutions that we do. And it's very dangerous, and they're going to surf the internet regardless of what computer they're on, whether it's a corporate-owned, computer or it's their own. So it's very, very scary out there. It's coming to our end, actually, Randy. But I wanted to share with you a little bit about a passion that I learned about you enjoy, that I enjoy, and I sent you a little gift early on. I hope you liked it.
Loved it. Received it. Enjoyed
Bomba
it.
601s.
Definitely appreciate those.
We're definitely going to have to get together, hopefully after this, or even virtually, and just share in one of those cigars. So I appreciate your time today. Anybody that wants to learn more about Critical Start, please feel free to reach out to us at Sinnott Wolach Technology Group. And if there's anything you want to add, Randy, before we close this up, let me know.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate you having me on. It's always a blast to chat. I mean, we talked for 20 minutes before this about cigars. So, definitely a pleasure to talk to. And I really appreciate the work you guys do and the value you provide to the customers. It's exactly within our mantra of do what's right for the customer, do what's right for employees, and don't do things that suck. So thanks for hosting me, and thanks for being such a great partner.
I appreciate it. And we're really excited about our relationship at Critical Start and your MDR service. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you everyone for watching. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar. Check out our YouTube channel for previous Let's Talk Security broadcasts. Just go to youtube.com and search for Sinnott Wolach Technology Group. This episode is sponsored by Critical Start, resolve every alert, stop breaches, and produced by Events by Drew Productions. Let's Talk Security is brought to you by Sinnott Wolach Technology Group, a leading provider of next-generation network and information security solutions and services.